afternoon, friends, and warm welcome. My name is Jennifer Pills, and I'm a volunteer with the Africa Hub. And Focus on Africa was started 6 years ago. The program was a partnership between the Division of Applied Social Sciences in CAFTER and the Bonn Life Science Center's Life, Science, and Society program. The purpose of the program is to encourage MU scholars with international interests to meet with each other, stimulate each other's thinking, and potentially lead to the creation of broader research networks and joint scholarship. Topics across the year are chosen to highlight the intersection among multiple disciplinary perspectives with a common geographical focus. We would like to thank today's sponsors for making this program possible and accessible. The MU Division of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity, and CAFNER International Programs. Next, Tuka is going to introduce our speaker today. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. Today we're happy to have Mr. Stephen Frimpong with us. He's a doctoral student in the Agricultural and Applied Economics Department at the University of Missouri. He's a development policy expert with a decade of experience working with multiple global development organizations. He has served as a national focal person on the EU FAO Forest Law Enforcement, Governance and Trade Program and the South-South Cooperation Program of the Food and Agriculture Organization. He also served as a socioeconomic and innovation platform lead on the USAID-funded Africa Rising project at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. He again worked as a node for the Regional Strategic Analysis and Knowledge Support System and led food policy and green economy research at the United Nations University and green economy research at the United Nations University. His presentation will explore the fundamental differences in incomes across extractive and non-extractive European colonies and provide a preliminary economic model of the effects of historical events such as colonization on economic development. May we kindly welcome Mr. Frimpong as he delivers his presentation to us. So Stephen, over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Tuka, for your kind words. Before I start, let me take an opportunity to thank my supervisor, Dr. Saikucha, who have been my support since I came here, and also Dr. Harvey. This paper was developed out of that class, and so I want to thank him and the rest of the students in that class. To begin with, for centuries, economists have tried to look at the fundamental causes of income disparities and development differentials among countries. And so if you look at the times of Adam Smith and through the times of Malthus and Bostrom and until current economists, all of these people have tried to look at how differences in income among countries occur, what drives it, and I mean, what causes these differences among countries in terms of developmental agendas. So among these economists, mostly referred to as the classical economists or the Smithians, these people have tried to develop a lot of developmental models or growth models. So people like Robert Solow, people like Louise, Doma, and a host of people have developed a number of models to try to assess the income differences and developmental differences among countries. But most of these functions most of these models that they developed are normally production function type models, which focuses on capital accumulation in the short run, and in the long run looks at technological change and investment. So in essence, what they are trying to say is that if citizens of a country can save and then invest in the short run, then they can, through investment, increase their income. And in the long run, if ideas are generated, which may lead to new innovations and then leads to some technological progress, which through that they can also build wealth and income. In most of these classical economic models, there'll be minimal emphasis on institutions and property rights. And not necessarily because it is not important, but probably because it is a bit difficult to model. But we all know that institutions, when we talk about institutions, these are rules of the game. So rules that govern how things are done and what is done and when it is done are very, very important. Because without rules, then we should expect some form of Hobbesian problem. Hobbesian states that if all human beings by our very nature are immoral. I mean, we have the propensity towards immorality. And so without rules, then everybody will do whatever he or she likes, and that may lead to some form of anarchy. Again, we see that institutions influence action. So if tomorrow there's a new rule that everybody should not wear mask, for instance, then we should expect that from tomorrow onwards, people not wear masks. And if they say wear 2 masks tomorrow, if tomorrow you start wearing masks. So institutions influence action. Again, we see that institutions therefore are the basis of economic development and a being for civilized existence. So that we see that institutions influence property rights, well-developed institutions influence capital accumulation, and then if institutions are properly developed, then we should expect that they should improve efficiency in terms of the use of capital that are generated in the country. Again, another omission over the period has been the role of historical events such as colonization on economic development. And as we know, and as studies have shown, studies by Isaac and Nack, Galso, Tal, a lot of studies on historical influences on several other factors. So we see that history might influence trust, might influence culture, and these parameters also has influence on economic development. So, for instance, if I cannot trust you, then it's quite difficult for us to be able to work together and build consensus and even probably invest together. And there have been studies on culture where religion has been used as a proxy. So if you take religion, there's been a lot of studies showing that religion has some negative impact or positive impact on development, depending on where the studies is done. So history works through its effect on our previous experiences in terms of trust and also in terms of culture. So in essence, history and institutions matter for economic development. So in recent times, there have been some growing interest in the last few decades, beginning from around 2000, there have been growing interest in understanding the historical effect of institutions on development. And so, for instance, people have studied so many of these countries, but one of the questions that also come up is why countries which were both colonized. I mean, if you take countries like, let's say, United States and Haiti, which were both colonized, why is that one of them is developed and the other is not developed? So Davis, for instance, in 2004, saw that Haiti, the infant mortality rate in Haiti is about 7, whilst infant mortality rate in the United States is about 79. And so this raises question as to whether historical events such as colonialism had any effect on economic development in countries. And so, yeah, so in light of that, there have been a number of studies also trying to look at the effect of colonialism in specific on development. And so the office of research in this area generally falls under 4 key categories. So there are studies that are looking at the identity of the colonizer or the legal origin. There are studies that are looking at the geography of the colonies, studies that are looking at factor endowments, studies that are looking at the conditions in the colonies. I will take time to go through each of these and narrate what each of these studies are focusing on. So if you take studies that are looking at the identity of the colonies, so here they are normally looking at the legal origins within the country, where the countries got their basic laws from. And so here they associate economic development to legal practice. So they're looking at things like common law, like civil law, like German or Scandinavian law, and then comparing countries that are practicing each of these laws to see, because they feel that these laws are colonial legacies. And the findings generally has been that countries that have common laws have stronger institutions, they're better able to protect shareholders, and then because they're able to protect shareholders and creditors, they're able to attract more investment, and therefore these countries are able to grow. So let me also add that most of these studies, which are focused on legal origins or identity of the colonizer, normally focus on one sector, which is the financial sector. So that has been one of the major criticisms of these studies, that because they focus on one sector, it doesn't reflect the overall effect of colonialism on economic development. Other studies use geography. So those of you who are familiar with GIS, things related to Tobler's first law. So Tobler says that everything is related to everything, but nearer things are more related to each other. So here, what they are trying to say is that countries that are closer to the Western Hemisphere will be influenced by Western culture, and so they will build their institutions such that it will be stronger, and then that can influence development. So that if you are further away from those countries, then it means that you will not be developed. But as we saw in the map that which I showed earlier, comparing the United States and Haiti, we see that even though these two countries are closer to each other, they are all closer to the latitude, but one of them is developed and the other is not developed. So people have also questioned the choice of that instrument as a proxy for measuring colonialism. There are other studies also by Engman and Sokolov, who have also looked at factor endowment. So here their focus is on resources, and they say that yes, countries that are developed, which were colonized, were mainly because those places were areas that were growing globally traded crops like sugarcane, and so through those globally traded crops, they're able to raise income and then develop. And so the last group of studies which motivated my study is studies on conditions in the colonies. So this study was developed by the groundbreaking work of Mogli and Johnson and Robinson. And in their studies, they see that the identity of the colonizer and the legal origin and all those proxies that are used to measure colonialism are not does not matter. So he says that what matters is actually the policies of the colonialist. And so they say that the colonialists introduced two types of policies. the policies actually were depended on whether they're able to settle in that area or they're not able to settle in that area. So it depended on disease conditions in the location. So in essence, what they're trying to say is that where the colonialist is not able to settle because of diseases, then they will extract resources as fast as possible, as fast as they could, and then leave. And then they go ahead to say that because they were not stationed in there, because they did not stay there in the colonial state, because they did not stay there, they did not build any strong institutions. The institutions that they left there were weak. So where they stayed, they developed strong institutions. Where they did not stay, they did not build any strong institutions in there. They only went there to extract resources and then left as quickly as possible. So based on his assertion, so he, Asimoglu and co, used settler mortality as a proxy for colonialism. And so, for instance, some of the things that they say is that the Europeans couldn't settle in some of the areas because of malaria and yellow fever, which killed about 80 and 85% respectively of the people that settled there. And that assertion doesn't seem to be correct, because if you look at it at the same time and at the same period when the Europeans moved to some of these colonies, there were also several diseases in several areas which they moved in and settled there. So if you look at CDC had done a very extensive work documenting when diseases were identified, where and how many people died and all that. And in those times, within the 15th and 16th century, diseases like smallpox, whooping cough, tuberculosis, almost all the vaccine preventable diseases were at play in parts of the Americas and in Asia. And so it couldn't have been that they had different policies and the policies were influenced by persistence of disease or dominance of disease in some areas. So, and again, if there were diseases in some places, and the disease, as mentioned, was malaria and yellow fever, then the question would be that why did they then settle in some other places like Kenya and South Africa and Tanzania and Madagascar, where they were also having the same kind of parasite, malaria and yellow fever was also under problem. So in essence, I think that they could not, mortality actually could be linked to several other factors. Diseases could be part, but it might not necessarily be the only major factor. Could be due to tropical weather, could be to oceanic travel, could be due to armed conflicts, and many other factors. So, but the reason that they could not settle in some of these areas mainly was because of excessive armed conflicts between the colonialists and the indigenous. If you take between 1824 and 1900, for instance, there were 5 major conflict, Anglo-Ashanti conflicts. And in 4 of them, the Asantis won. In Ghana, the Asantis won. And then in the 5th one, they won, and then they exiled their king. So these portray that how conflicts played a major role in terms of their settlement. The other option was through the use of indirect rule. So because of the conflicts, some of they couldn't settle in some of these areas, and then they had to use indirect rule as a means to rule. Another major problem was land acquisition. So if you don't have land, then it means you cannot live in those colonies. And so in some of the areas, there were major conflicts in terms of land appropriation. So in an attempt to expropriate land, there were major conflict between the colonialists and the inhabitants or the citizens of this area. So as I mentioned, problem favorable weather, and the factor that might affect that. And then also population size. So if you look at the population, I mean, they even if they wanted, they couldn't have stayed almost every part of the colonies in the same population size as they stayed in other places. So probably if you have the option of choosing between where it's best for you. So it might not be necessary because of diseases or any other factor. So in essence, I agree with all the previous studies in terms of the fact that yes, better institutions support economic development, well-developed property rights influence economic development. But where I diverge with them is the elevation of institutions and property rights or geography as a fundamental pathway for economic development. So the earlier studies portray colonialism as almost or as they portray the effect of colonialism as only through institutions. So as if without institutions, colonialism did not have any other route through which there was underdevelopment. So and again, if we take it that colonialism worked only through institutions, then in countries such as Nepal, such as Ethiopia, such as Afghanistan, where they didn't even settle there, didn't even actually enter there, how are they also not developed? I mean, if it's only through institutions, then they should have those countries where the colonialists didn't settle should have stronger institutions should be able to define, get a well-defined property rights and be able to develop. But these countries are also not developed. So it is not necessarily only through institutions. Institutions are important, but they are not the core of the issue. So that leads me to ask some kind of rhetorical questions that can help us to get to where I want to get to. So one of them is, can high incomes also influence the development of strong institutions and property rights? Yes, because I see institutions are just names of codes, of written or unwritten codes. And so without enforcement, institutions are generally weak. So institutions, whether they'll be strong or they'll be weak, will depend on how they are enforced. So if institutions are not properly enforced, then they'll be weak. And how do you enforce? Enforcement, you also need resources to do that. So incomes can have some significant improvement on institutional strength. And that question is whether the current state of institutions in high-income countries were the same during pre-colonial times. Because if previous studies say that they had two policies whereby they set up strong institutions in currently developed countries and weak institutions in currently undeveloped countries, then the question is, those countries that had strong institutions should have developed even before independence. But we see that that is not the case. Most of these countries developed post-independence, and the current strength of institutions are not linked to what existed previously. Again, even in terms of improvement, the improvement of those institutions did not occur in the presence of the colonialists. So you don't need colonial presence for your institutions to be stronger. And again, another major question that you ask yourself is, how strong were institutions in Europe within the 15th and 20th century when they were colonizing for that same institutions, whether strong or weak, to be transferred to their colonies. Their account from North and Ringast, Mogri, in terms of return of fortunes in his book in 2002, where he documents the state of institutions within Europe in those periods. And they argues that the institutions at that time, they had ill-developed property rights, they had confiscatory governments, the common law courts could be set aside by the then ruling elite, which is the crown, and they could confiscate property. So, and the market was not developed even at that time. So that tells you that even as at the 17th century, before the glorious Revolution, which took place in 1688. Before that, before 1688, institutions in Europe were generally very weak. So they couldn't have transferred stronger institutions to one section of their colonies and transfer weaker institutions to other sections of their colonies. So in a nutshell, yeah, so the studies generally have been useful in trying to show the effect of colonialism on underdevelopment. But the problem is that the ex-parte characterization of institutions lacks much of the subtlety that needs to be, needs to be understood in terms of how colonialism might have affected underdevelopment in some of these countries. So yeah, so there may be many dimensions to how colonialism might have affected development across the countries. And I see that one of the key routes through which colonialism might have affected is development of countries is through indirect rule. So I think that could be one of the major instruments that can be used as a measure of underdevelopment or as a measure of a colonial effect on development. And so why is indirect rule very important? Now, if you look at the theory of the state, the theory states that if individuals decide to protect themselves, if you are, let's say, if you don't have a state and everybody is living by himself, and he decides to protect his or himself, he may have to incur a lot of cost in securing weapons and surveillance, and these you may have to live in constant fear. But if a ruler emerges and takes monopoly over the state force and protect his people, then he can use the coercive force, I mean the state power or the state policing power to organize the people so that they can achieve some collective benefit. And so the ruler obtains taxes, takes labor, obtain all the resources within the country, and a reasonable ruler will use the resources to develop or to build the general well-being of these people. So if you have, let's say, indirect rule where someone is ruling and taking taxes and taking labor and taking resources and not developing or not using for the well-being of the people whom those resources are taken from, then eventually you are underdeveloping for centuries. So yes, so the rulers in this case, the colonialists are the residual claimants of state surpluses. Okay. So indirect rule, in effect, thus captures resource capture from the European colonialism. It also captures conflict because there are several studies which have looked at indirect rule and its relation to conflict. What happens is that if the colonialists in introducing indirect rule often makes one tribe or one group of people superior over the others. So if we have a country that has, let's say, five different tribes which were autonomous, which were independent, which were equal at the time before colonialism, when indirect rule is introduced, some of these tribes are made superior, especially those tribes that are very conflicting. They are made to rule the others, and this has led to some form of tribal conflict because even post-colonialism, there's still kind of some of this agitation between different tribes. So indirect rule has led to some of this. Another thing is the strife because nobody really trusted each other. Why should I'm not too sure talking to you whether you're going to talk to the colonialists or you're not going to talk to them soon. And we see that this has even played out through many aspects of colonialism, and studies have shown that African Americans, for instance, are people who do not trust a lot, all because of colonialism. Again, another thing is culture. So we see that through indirect rule and cultures were modified. Some cultures were made superior than other people's culture. And so we see that indirect rule could be truly an exogenous measure of colonialism on economic development. And so I mean, economics without models makes it not interesting. So I put up a very simple model whereby our dependent variable are the economic growth parameters of a country, and RI is the indirect rule, and RI minus I are any other institutional factors. We have omega, which represents other classical variables like capital, like labor, and all other classical variables, and our error term. And then so I tested. I tried to test the effect of indirect rule on economic development across some of the countries. So I took data from World Bank and did some modification with it in terms of trying to locate which places has indirect rule, places that doesn't have indirect rule, measuring it as a dummy variable. And the estimate, and in terms of this is just a graphical representation of growth rate in terms of purchasing power parity. And you see that countries that had indirect rule on average were growing at negative 0.1%, whilst countries that had direct rule were growing at a rate of about 2.4%. I mean, that is in 2018. Now, I went ahead to model how indirect rule affects GDP growth. And we see that indirect rule negatively affects GDP growth. And so countries that didn't have indirect rule were growing at least 2.5 times less than countries that that had direct rule. And then I also went ahead to look at the effect of indirect rule on GDP per capita, which is one developmental measure. And you see that indirect rule negatively affects GDP growth, GDP per capita. And so we see that countries that had indirect rule had at least 21% less in terms of GDP per capita relative to other countries. Now, this is not perfect estimate, because I know, and I mean, this is an ongoing work. I just started this work, and so there are a lot of things that needs to be done, and there are a lot of variables that need to be controlled in terms of avoiding omitted variable biases. So, in conclusion, yes, weak institutions and property rights for me, are peripheries of colonial development. They are other core issues that might have affected economic development, current economic development. So, in my view, income per capita and other low factors, other factors that we see, may be due to other factors rather than institutions. Institutions may be part, but there could be many other factors that contributed to contributing to current underdevelopment. Again, I see that colonial underdevelopment rather influence capital or influence and income growth, and income growth rather is affecting the development of institutions. So it is not the reverse, whereby colonialism rather affected institutions, and institutions that is affecting income growth. So I also believe that indirect rule may be one of the best proxies, if measured correctly, which can capture the effect of colonialization on current development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frimpong, for that insightful presentation. So now we would move over to questions. If you have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat box. And if it's something that might need further explanation, I think we should be able to give you the opportunity to ask verbally. So while we're waiting for questions. I think I might just maybe start with maybe one or two questions. So I think from your model, the model you presented, you kind of were looking at indirect role as your major independent variable. I was wondering, did you kind of take into consideration factors such as conflicts, like, or even say the ethnic diversity in those places, like factors that could have influenced the colonizers' decision to rule directly, maybe to settle there or to adopt this other approach of indirect rule, since we didn't really see all the explanatory variables that you included. Sorry, you're muted, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. And yes, I haven't. I'm using indirect rule because I think it captures the very essence of colonialism in a broader sense, so that yes, through indirect rule there could be conflict, there could be many other. I mean, some of those variables that I enumerated and I mentioned, but I believe those effects work through. I mean, it's quite also difficult to capture conflicts and that had happened during the colonial times. So that is much more easier to look at it in terms of where there has been direct rule and where there has not been. I don't know whether I've answered your question.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you, thank you for that. So we have a question from Sonita. She says, I'm sorry. Did you look into all or at least some of the variables as to why Haiti is so much poorer than US? Just following up on the comparison you made earlier, what do you think are the causes for such wide variation in both countries?
Yes. So per the model that I just put up, and then the differences mainly is through the use of indirect rule, but there could be several other factors. I mean, this is the institutional variable, but there could be several other classical variables like capital, like labor, and all those classical variables. But if we take things like indirect rule, Haiti had some form of indirect rule ruling in those areas, and so we expect that some of those places were also areas that had a lot of extractionists going on in those areas. So the differences could be in terms of resources, in terms of conflict, in terms of the extent of degradation that they face relative to other countries. Is that clear, Sonny? Sonita, okay.
Thanks for the question. Thanks for the response. Please feel free to type in any questions you have. Okay, we have I think just a clarification on what the concept of direct rule means.
So should I take the questions?
Oh yes, please. Yes, please.
Yes. So direct ruling is when the colonialists are there and they are executing almost every aspect of their their plan or their agenda. But indirect ruling is where we have, let's say, few, two or three or four, few of the colonialists settled in the colonies and use the local people as rulers of their own. So instead of probably going to execute their policies or their agenda, they use the local people to rule over their own people. So it's like they are the next force behind what the local people who are rulers are doing over there. I don't know whether he gets whether Patrick gets it. So, for instance, if you take the United States, for instance, assuming I'm the chief colonialist here and I take hold of the United States, instead of me coming to rule, to set rules and do everything so that you see that I'm the one I'm taking the activities in there, I use the local people here to do it, whilst I sit behind and then watch them do it. So they will come and report to me, and then I'll give them instructions and direction to go and implement. So in essence, you might not see that I'm the one ruling, but I'm the one ruling indirectly through the local people.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. There's a question about whether you looked at how the development of civil society networks could influence economic development, I believe.
So, yeah, so looking at it in terms of history, I'm not very sure whether at the time civil society groups networks were properly developed. Yes, there could be some groups that might have met and voted over some of the policies and programs, but it is not certain that at let's say within the 15th century, 16th century, civil society networks were and again, colonialism didn't really introduce in its wake civil society networks for us to look at how that might have impacted development at that times. So here the focus is on colonialism and what it did and what it did not do, not in terms of any other factors. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah, at least to me it does. Yeah. Thank you. So there's a question. It says, what has surprised you most in your research so far?
this is a very big question. Not much, but the major thing that I kind of find is some of the proxies which doesn't seem to relate very well with colonialism, and so I feel that there should be, even if not in direct rule, there should be better, more relatable instruments that is able to capture colonial effect. So to think of things like geography and settler mortality. These even though it looks like shows good results, but it doesn't capture the true meaning of colonialism within those areas. There's, I mean, if you read some of them, there are several questions that one can raise with respect to some of the instruments that are used, and in my humble opinion, I think those instruments doesn't capture very well what colonialism actually stands for.
Okay, thanks for sharing. We have one more question here. It says, if weak institutions and property rights are correlated with or causing poor development. How can these two be improved moving forward?
Okay, so if I look at previous studies, some of them have looked at legal origins. So the main focus has been on colonialist introduction of certain rules such as common law, civil law, German and Scandinavian law, and the feels these were legacies that were left by the colonialists, and some of these rules work effectively somewhere, other places doesn't work effectively, and these rules bears on the financial sector or the development of those countries. And so already some of these rules have been improved. Already some of these rules have been improved because they state that the colonialists, the rules that they introduced are not the same rules as it exists now. There've been already some improvement. Yes, some of these developed countries also have a lot of institutions and rules and norms and codes. Only that implementation has always been the challenge because of some either resource limitations or some political influence and a whole lot of other bundle of factors. But in terms of colonialist related institutions, then we're looking more in terms of things like like the rule of law and things of common law related factors.
Okay, thank you for that response. I don't know if we have any other questions, but I can't see any. I think that's all for now.
Okay.
So once again, thank you very much, Stephen. Your presentation was very enlightening. Thank you for your time and thank you for the education you've given to all of us, really. And thank you to all our attendants. We appreciate you being with us today. We have a couple of announcements. Next week, that's next week, Thursday, on the 11th of February, we'll be having a film screening titled Where the Road Runs Out. It's going to be via Zoom. The link is going to be sent out. So please make sure you follow us on Facebook to get the link for that. And then exactly a month from today, that's on the 3rd of March, we're going to be having our next Focus on Africa presentation. Same time, that's 12 p.m. And our speaker will be Dr. Elizabeth McConaughey. She's the director of the Kansas African Studies Center over there at the University of Kansas. She is a historian, so please make sure to join us for that. That's 1 month from today. And if you have any questions or any comments, always feel free to reach out to us via our email address. So we thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us. I will hand over to Jennifer if she has any closing words. You're muted, Jennifer.
Thanks again, Tuka. Thank you, Stephen, for your wonderful, informative presentation, and for all the participants today. We really appreciate and value your time today. And I'm going to share the flyer for the film screening, and have a good rest of your day. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Focus on Africa and the upcoming film screening. Our email is africahub@missouri.edu. If you have any questions that you think of, I can share those with Stephen and he'll follow up with you. And then we just thank you for